The National Drug Law Enforcement Agency has arrested Azuka Kenrick, the General Overseer of a Lagos church, for alleged drug trafficking. NDLEA spokesperson Femi Babafemi said in a statement today, and he said the cleric was apprehended after a Dubai-bound consignment of methamphetamine and skunk was intercepted. Kenrick, said to be the General Overseer of Seraphic and Sabbath Assembly in Lagos, was arrested alongside Udezuka Udoka, a student of Emmanuel College of Theology, Samonda in Ibadan. They were said to have attempted to export methamphetamine and skunk consignments concealed in kegs of palm oil through the NAHCO export shed of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Ikeja in Lagos. How bad is the issue of drug abuse and misuse in Nigeria, and how is it fueling terrorism in Nigeria? What can be done to address these issues ahead of Nigeria's elections to ensure peaceful polls? Tom Parker, Project Coordinator, Counter-Terrorism Program, UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Nigeria Country Office, joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So now, if you look at the figures, 14.4% of Nigerians are on drug from the age of 15 to 64. That's significantly higher than the global figure of 5.5%. How did we get here?
Well, we have a lot of challenges with drug production inside Nigeria. Obviously, there is a challenge with criminality also in the country. And obviously, a combination of a permissive environment and the ability to produce drugs locally does create a heightened spike of drug use.
Right. Tolu has just reeled out the figures to you, Tom, tonight. But you know what? The fact that your office has been able to find a nexus between drug abuse and violent extremism. Let's talk about that and the implication of your discovery, especially as we count down to Nigeria's next general election, which is barely 12 days away.
Well, I think I need to be quite careful on how we present this. There is no question that there is a significant amount of drug abuse amongst members of militant groups like Boko Haram, and we've seen this also in the rehabilitation process of individuals who come out of the bush. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a driver of violent extremism. In fact, violent extremism is really complex. The causes are multifaceted, and drug use is really only a small factor.
Okay, you mentioned earlier environmental factor. Now, how do we now handle that, seeing that majority of our youth are way behind on their sanity when it comes to drug abuse, and the elections are knocking, and we know what that can do to impact the security of lives and property during elections?
Well, the short answer, I'm afraid, is that there are no simple solutions to the problem of violent extremism or why people join violent extremist groups or terrorist groups. There are many different factors, both at the personal level, the community level, and at the national level that act on people differently. Every individual's reason for joining an extremist group is slightly different. And it does require an incredibly nuanced response from government. In the short term, protective security measures obviously can help secure the election. But in the longer term, in terms of addressing people's interest in joining terrorist organizations, there's a complex all-of-government response that really needs to take place to eliminate the attraction of violent extremist groups.
Right. Well, Tom, just recently there was a research, that actually opened our eyes with the reason why a lot of people join this violent extremist group, most of them because they want something to do, not necessarily because of religion or ideology. Quite eye-opening there. But let's look forward and talk about solutions to this. We've seen here in Nigeria, the army really come up with the reintegration program, really to get those who come off of this violent extremism to be reintegrated into society. But talk to us about other things we can do really to help with the situation, which, according to this report, is dire at the moment.
Well, the situation across sub-Saharan Africa is really concerning. In 2021, sub-Saharan Africa saw 48% of all terrorist attacks or deaths from terrorism. which is a marked shift from the Middle East. So the situation across the region is deeply concerning. The Nigerian government's quite a lot of experience now in responding to terrorism, and I'm glad that you mentioned the rehabilitation efforts that the military have been involved in Operation Safe Corridor, which really is a groundbreaking program and something of a global example of how to respond to the threat of terrorism. However, having said that, two things we know drive terrorism more than anything else, and you mentioned one of them. Lack of opportunity is a very big driver. The other is experience of human rights abuse and violence at the hands of the state or other local actors. And those are two areas in which I think Nigeria has worked really hard to make improvements. But obviously there are lots of challenges, and the conflict zone violence is always present. So there's a lot to be done, I'm afraid.
Now let's look at border crossing and how that affects our territorial integrity. What are your recommendations, Tom, to better foster our territorial integrity?
So critical for that is relationships with other countries in the region. And in that regard, through the Lake Chad Basin Commission, there are actually strong relationships and strengthening relationships. There are challenges, of course, not least linguistic, between Francophone countries and Anglophone countries, and ensuring the simple and accurate exchange of information. But a lot of efforts with the assistance of the international community have been made to try and strengthen these ties and speed up the sharing of information between governments on both sides of the border. And that really is a tremendously important step forward. It's very difficult in particularly a remote area as we have in the Bay States to secure every inch of the border. So good relations between people on either side, good information sharing is critical.
Well, good information sharing is critical, but that's for those who go through the manned borders, because as it stands right now, unfortunately, here in Nigeria, porous borders, over 1,000 points are manned across the country. But you know what, Tom, let's look at the fact that this is the first ever International Day for the Prevention of Violent Extremism, as well as conducive to terrorism. At the end of the day, it just shows that for the UN to pick out a day to mark this particular issue as it concerns preventing violent extremism, that means there's a huge problem at the moment across the globe. So what more can not just the Nigerian government, but humanity in general do to avoid people even going into this extremist group in the first place? Prevention now. Tom?
Well, thank you for asking that question, and you really put your finger on it. The point of this first International Day is to talk about prevention. Traditionally, the response to terrorist threats essentially has been after the incident. It's a reflexive, it's a criminal justice response. And in the last 10 years, we've learned more and more about early intervention, ways to actually prevent the attack happening, because after all, prevention is better than a cure. It's much easier to reach, or much better to reach people before they commit the act and bring them back into the community than afterwards. Much harder once something serious has happened. So that's really the idea behind this. And to have those sort of early interventions, you need programs that give youth opportunity, educational programs, psychosocial support, but also community relationship building between different elements of the community and the security forces. All of these different things brought together can make a difference.
Amazing, amazing. Tom, could you tell us more about information sharing, especially when it comes to international intelligence?
Well, that's a very difficult area to talk about, and not something that the UN is directly involved in. We work with building relationships between states, but the delicate issue of sharing information, that's between the states themselves.
Well, Tom, before we let you go tonight, we have to actually get your take on the fact that the security agents in Nigeria, they've actually assured Nigerians over and over again that security will not be a challenge going into this election. But you, as an observer, looking at what is on ground, are there any concerns that you have with regards to security when it concerns Nigeria's forthcoming general elections? And if you do have any, how can this, be quelled before it becomes a major issue?
Well, we work very closely with the security agencies and the police in capacity building efforts and training efforts. So I can say with personal experience that there is a strong and enduring commitment to try and secure these elections and secure the community at large before and after the elections as well. But it is challenging. And the problem with terrorism is terrorists can act at a place and time of their choosing, whereas the state has to mount protection everywhere. So it is challenging. this government and these security forces have a lot of experience in this area. And so I'm sure they will be doing everything they can to secure the election and the people of Nigeria over the next couple of months.
Well, Tom is confident.
Thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate your time on News Night.